Emily, a talented surgeon, is forced to confront the past when the man who once rejected her for her career calls for help, his son's life hanging in the balance. As she saves him, old wounds resurface, but Emily is determined to move on, building a new life with her husband and daughter. When an unexpected call from Nick's ex-wife pulls her back into his chaotic world, Emily must decide if she'll help a man who's already broken her heart, or leave the past behind for good. Will she make the right choice, or will history repeat itself? Stay with us to discover how it all ends, and don't forget to subscribe. Emily sat at the small desk in the sterile, fluorescent-lit laboratory, hurriedly scribbling the last few notes on a medical report. Her hands were slightly trembling from the long hours, but she was almost done. The familiar sound of her phone vibrating on the desk interrupted her concentration. With a tired but content smile, she reached over and answered the call, already knowing who it was. "Hey, love," she greeted, her voice light and warm, despite the exhaustion in her body. "I'm almost done here. I'll be finished in about an hour. How about you? How's your day been?" There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end spoke, soft and full of affection. "I'm good, just waiting for you to get off work. I can't wait to see you tonight." A small laugh escaped Emily's lips, the kind of laugh that came from a place of comfort, of knowing someone so well that every conversation felt like a warm embrace. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Want me to meet you at the cafe? I haven't eaten all day." The excitement in Nick's voice was evident as he responded, "Yeah, that sounds perfect. I'll be there waiting for you." Emily's heart fluttered at the thought of seeing him, and she quickly hung up the phone, focusing her attention back on the files in front of her. But as she turned to grab a stack of paperwork, the door to the lab suddenly swung open. Emily turned, startled, to see Nick standing in the doorway, his face pale and strained, as if he had just walked into a world he didn't understand. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep the surprise out of her voice. "I thought you were just picking me up later." Nick's eyes darted to the rows of specimen jars lined up neatly on the counter. His expression twisted in discomfort, and Emily could almost hear his thoughts as he stepped inside the room, his gaze lingering on the samples. His reaction was immediate, his body language rigid. "What's all this?" he asked, voice tinged with confusion, disbelief, and Emily would later realize, disgust. You're actually handling all these." Emily blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "Well, yeah," she replied with a slight shrug. "It's part of the work here. I'm almost done, just a few more things to sort out. It's not a big deal." But Nick was still staring at the jars, his face going white, the lines of his jaw tightening as though the mere sight of the lab made him uneasy. "I didn't know this is what you did," he said, his voice growing colder. "I didn't know this was part of your work. You actually touch all this stuff." Emily felt a pang in her chest at the sharpness in his tone. He was looking at her like she was something foreign, something he didn't recognize anymore. "Nick, this is part of the medical field," she explained, trying to stay calm. "This is the kind of work we do in training. We help people. It's not about how clean or nice it looks. It's about the outcome." But Nick didn't hear her. He was already backing away from the counter, his face contorted in disbelief. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "You actually spend your time with all this filth. I didn't think I'd ever see you like this. It's not what I imagined for you." His words stung, and Emily could feel the bitter taste of disappointment creeping into her chest. She had spent months sharing her life with him, letting him in, letting him see the part of her that cared so deeply about her work. And now, in an instant, it felt like he was rejecting all of that. The dream she had worked so hard for, the future she had envisioned, was suddenly being mocked. Nick's words hit her harder than she expected, his criticism cutting deeper than anything she had experienced in her career so far. "I just can't stand the thought of you doing this, touching all these things, and then coming home to me," he said, his voice thick with disdain. "Don't you want something better? Something cleaner? Something more dignified?" Emily's heart broke at the words, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected challenges in her journey. Of course she had, but she never thought the person she was closest to would make her feel small, would make her feel like her calling wasn't worthy of respect. With quiet composure, she tried to respond, but Nick had already turned, his mind made up, his judgment cast. "I can't do this," he said, his voice tinged with finality. "I won't be with someone who chooses this over everything else. Goodbye, Emily." He walked out of the lab, leaving Emily standing there, frozen, staring at the empty door. For a lone moment, she didn't move. She wanted to scream, wanted to ask him why he couldn't understand her, why he couldn't accept who she was. But instead, she swallowed the lump in her throat and closed her eyes. She knew that this was the end. Not just of their relationship, but of an illusion she had built around Nick. She had seen him as someone who would understand her passion, someone who would stand by her no matter what. But in that moment, she saw him for who he truly was, someone who couldn't accept her dreams, someone who couldn't embrace the world she was stepping into. When she opened her eyes again, Emily's heart felt heavy, but she knew what needed to be done. She had her work, and she had her future, and that was enough. With a deep breath, she returned to the counter, wiping the tears that threatened to fall. Her hands were steady as she continued sorting the samples. She had been knocked down, but she would rise. This wasn't the end for her. It was only the beginning. As the months passed, Emily's life began to take shape in ways she had once only dreamed of. The initial sting of Nick's rejection gradually faded as she threw herself into her studies and her work with an intensity she had never known. The pain of their breakup lingered like a dull ache in the back of her mind, but it became less and less significant with each passing day, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. She immersed herself in her medical studies, determined to prove to herself and to everyone else that she was more than what Nick had seen her as. The long nights spent in the hospital, shadowing experienced doctors, assisting in surgeries, and analyzing case studies, all became her sanctuary. The cold, sterile environment of the medical world, once something she had feared, now felt like home. The work, no matter how grueling or emotionally taxing, was what she had always been meant to do. By the time Emily graduated, she had become one of the top students in her class. Her professors were impressed with her dedication and skill, praising her not only for her intelligence, but for her compassion, something they didn't always find in students so focused on technical perfection. Emily knew that becoming a doctor wasn't just about knowing the right diagnosis or executing the perfect procedure. It was about connecting with people, understanding their pain, and making a difference in their lives. She had found her calling. Despite the grueling hours and the exhaustion that came with it, Emily managed to keep a semblance of balance in her life. She made time for the people who truly mattered to her, her family, her closest friends, and most importantly, herself. She spent weekends with her parents, visiting the small town she grew up in, reconnecting with the quiet, grounded life that had shaped her. There she could recharge, ground herself, and reflect on the path she was on. One fateful weekend, while attending a medical conference, she met Daniel, a fellow doctor who had recently moved to the city for a specialized surgical residency. Unlike Nick, who had been unsure about her choices, Daniel immediately admired her strength, her intelligence, and her passion for medicine. They bonded over their shared dedication to their work and before long, the bond they shared became something deeper. Daniel was warm, patient, and understanding, the opposite of everything Nick had been. With him, Emily didn't have to explain herself, didn't have to defend her choices. He admired her for who she was, for the woman she had become. Their relationship grew naturally, and soon they were inseparable. They spent hours talking about their patients, their dreams for the future, and their hopes for the kind of doctors they wanted to become. There was no judgment, no doubt, only mutual respect and affection. After a few years together, they married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. The joy she had felt during the wedding day was a feeling Emily had never thought she would experience again after the heartache with Nick. It wasn't just the wedding that filled her with happiness. It was the sense of fulfillment in every aspect of her life. She had a career she was passionate about, a loving husband, and a future that she had carefully crafted. Emily's career continued to blossom. She quickly gained recognition as a talented surgeon, one whose skill was matched only by her compassion. She became known for taking on the most complex cases, never shying away from a challenge, always willing to push herself to be better. Her work ethic was relentless, and soon she earned the respect of her colleagues and patients alike. It wasn't just her technical expertise that set her apart. It was her genuine desire to help people, to make their lives better, even in the smallest of ways. And yet, even as her professional life soared, there was still a part of Emily that felt a little unsettled, a little unsure. She had achieved everything she had once dreamed of, an accomplished career, a happy marriage, the respect of her peers. But there was a nagging question she couldn't shake. Did it all truly matter if she hadn't found peace with the past? Was she truly happy, or was she just distracted by success? It was on one particularly grueling shift in the emergency room that the answer came, unexpected and unwelcome. The emergency doors slammed open, and a team of paramedics rushed in, pushing a young man on a gurney. He was unconscious, bleeding heavily from a stab wound in his abdomen. The situation was dire, and Emily immediately took charge. There was no time for hesitation. She assessed the wound, barking orders at the nurses, and preparing for surgery. As the team worked quickly to stabilize the young man, Emily's mind barely registered his face, until, that is, she saw the man who had followed the paramedics into the room. A familiar figure, standing at the door with an anxious, frantic look on his face. Nick. Her heart stopped for a split second, and she had to force herself to focus on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to let the sight of him distract her now. But Nick was relentless, moving forward despite the staff trying to block him. "Please," he begged, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Please, save my son. I can't lose him. I'll do anything, please, just save him." For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The young man on the gurney was Nick's son. Emily had no idea how to feel. How could she? He had walked away from her once without a second thought, and now here he was, asking her for help. The bitterness that had once clung to her soul began to bubble up, but she pushed it down. There was no room for personal feelings in the operating room. Not now. "Step back," Emily said, her voice firm, commanding. "We need to work." "Now." Nick complied, stepping aside, but his eyes never left the gurney. His son's life hung by a thread, and it was in that moment, amid the sterile, chaotic environment of the emergency room, that Emily realized how much her work truly meant to her. In this room, there was no past, no hurt, no resentment. There was only the immediate need to save a life, to do the job she had chosen. The operation was long and complicated, but Emily, with steady hands and a clear mind, managed to stabilize the young man. As the hours ticked by, Nick waited, pacing nervously outside the operating room. Emily could feel his presence, but she didn't let it distract her. The job came first, as it always did. When the surgery was finally over, Emily emerged, her face grim but hopeful. Nick rushed toward her, his hands trembling as he reached out to her. "Is he going to be okay?" he asked, voice cracking with emotion. Emily looked him in the eye, her expression unreadable. "He's alive," she said simply. "We'll have to wait and see, but he's got a fighting chance now." And in that moment, something shifted. The old anger she had once held for Nick was still there, buried beneath the surface, but Emily knew that she was no longer the woman he had once known. She had moved past him, past their history. She had a new life now, one where people like Nick couldn't break her. She had done what needed to be done. As she walked away from him, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't realized she'd been missing. She had let go. The days that followed the operation felt like a blur to Emily. She had done what needed to be done. She had saved Nick's son. And yet, there was no sense of closure, no feeling of triumph. Her life had moved on from Nick long ago, but there was still something unsettling about seeing him again, standing in the same hospital, waiting for her to do what she had done so many times before, save someone who needed her. Her nights were filled with surgeries and long shifts at the hospital, and her days were spent reviewing medical cases, consulting with colleagues, and preparing for her next challenge. She had achieved so much, and yet there was always more to do, more to learn. It was what kept her going, what kept her grounded. But despite her focus on her work, Nick was never far from her mind. She couldn't help but think of him when she passed by the trauma unit, or when she stood in the operating room, recalling the look of desperation on his face when he asked her to save his son. It wasn't that she wanted to dwell on it. It was just that the encounter had reminded her of who she had once been, of the woman who had been willing to sacrifice so much for a relationship that ultimately hadn't been worth it. And then, one afternoon, it happened. Emily had just finished a round of surgeries and was sitting in her office when a soft knock came at the door. She didn't look up immediately, too busy reviewing a medical chart. The door creaked open, then a voice, soft, hesitant, spoke her name. "Emily?" She froze. The voice was unmistakable. "Nick." She looked up to find him standing there, his face tired, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and something else, something she couldn't quite place. He looked older, somehow worn down by life in a way she hadn't noticed before. And though his presence was unexpected, there was something about it that stirred a memory deep within her, of the boy she had once loved, of the man she had once trusted. "I didn't expect you to be here," she said, her voice cool but polite. "I thought you'd be busy with your son." Nick hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he stepped further into the room. He seemed smaller now, less certain of himself than before. Emily could see the weight of regret in his eyes, the kind of regret that only came with the realization that you had made a terrible mistake. Is he going to be okay?" Nick asked, his voice thick with emotion. Emily took a moment to gather her thoughts before answering. "Your son's condition is still critical," she said. "We've managed to stabilize him, but we need to monitor him closely. There's still a long way to go." Nick nodded, his face falling with the news. He seemed lost in thought for a moment before looking back at Emily, his expression shifting from worry to something else, something deeper. "I owe you everything," he said softly, almost as if he couldn't believe the words were coming out of his mouth. "I didn't know what to think when I saw you. I never imagined that you'd be the one to save him." Emily glanced at him, trying to keep her emotions in check. She didn't want to feel anything for him, not after everything. She had moved on, built a life that was good, that was right for her. Yet here he was, standing in front of her, apologizing, acknowledging the past in a way she hadn't expected. "I'm just doing my job," Emily said, her tone firm but not unkind. "I didn't save your son because of who you are, Nick. I saved him because that's what I do. I'm a doctor and I help people. It's as simple as that." Nick seemed to absorb her words for a moment, his gaze dropping to the floor before he looked up again, his eyes searching hers. "I've been thinking a lot about the past," he began, his voice tentative. "About everything that happened between us. And I know I messed up, Emily. I was an idiot. I didn't understand you, didn't understand what you needed. I wasn't ready for who you were." Emily's heart clenched at his words. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, could hear the regret in his voice. And for a moment, a small part of her, the part that had once loved him so deeply, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. But then she reminded herself that this was the same man who had walked away from her without a second thought. This was the same man who had judged her career, who had rejected the very thing that had made her the woman she was. She couldn't let herself forget that. "I don't think it's about you being ready for me," Emily said, her voice softer now, but still firm. "It was about me being ready for myself. I had to learn to accept who I am, what I do. I couldn't keep letting other people define me, not even you." Nick's expression shifted, as though he were processing her words, trying to understand what she meant. He seemed to shrink back slightly, as though her words had struck him in a way he hadn't expected. "I was so wrong, Emily," he said, his voice low. "I should have supported you, not judged you. I see that now. I see what you've become, and I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I couldn't be the person you needed me to be." Emily didn't know how to respond. The apology, though heartfelt, felt distant now, like it had come too late. She had moved on from that version of Nick, from the man who had made her question herself, from the man who had walked out when things got hard. "You don't need to apologize, Nick," she said, her voice steady. "It's been a long time since I needed anything from you. I've found my own way." There was a long silence between them, one that seemed to stretch on forever. Nick looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness, before he nodded slowly, as though finally understanding the truth of what she was saying. "I'll go," he said softly. "I just wanted to say that I was sorry, and thank you for saving my son." Emily nodded, offering him a small, polite smile. "Take care of him," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "And take care of yourself." With one last look, Nick turned and walked out of her office, leaving Emily standing there, her heart heavy but unbroken. She knew that this encounter, this conversation, would be the last time they would ever speak. And she was okay with that. As she sat back in her chair, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had let go of the past, finally. Nick had come into her life, and she had loved him. But that was before. Now she had something new, something better. Her life, her work, her family, those were the things that truly mattered. And nothing, not even the past, could take them away from her. The days that followed Nick's visit to her office were quiet, almost eerily so. Emily returned to her routine, diving back into her work with the kind of determination she had always had, but now with a sense of closure she hadn't expected to feel. Nick's apology, though it had stirred some long-buried emotions, didn't change anything in her life. She had moved on, and in a way, so had he. The encounter had been necessary, but it was over now. The past had its place, and it wasn't in her future. Her focus shifted entirely back to her family, her career, and the life she had built. Daniel, her husband, was there every step of the way, providing the kind of support she had always needed. He was understanding, patient, and kind. They had their daughter now, a bright little girl with her mother's determination and her father's infectious laughter. Emily watched as Daniel cooked dinner on the nights when she worked late, and she marveled at the family they had created together. It was a good life, a fulfilling life. But as time passed, a feeling began to creep in, something that Emily hadn't expected. Despite the love she felt for Daniel, despite the life they shared, there were moments when she would find herself reflecting on the past, on the version of herself that had once been so entwined with Nick. She would catch herself thinking of the dreams they had once shared, the future they had talked about in whispered conversations late at night, and the hope that had existed between them before everything had fallen apart. Still, she told herself, those days were long gone. She had chosen a new path, a new future. And yet, the quiet moments of doubt seemed to come and go, like fleeting shadows she couldn't chase away. Emily knew that she had to find peace with the past before it could truly stop haunting her. Then it happened. The phone rang late one evening, just as Emily was finishing up her rounds at the hospital. She saw Daniel's name flash on the screen, and the familiar warmth that surged through her chest made her smile. She had been working late, and she couldn't wait to get home to him. But when she answered, the voice on the other end wasn't Daniel's. It was someone else, someone familiar. The sudden wave of recognition hit her like a punch to the gut. "Emily, it's Nick." For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Her heart seemed to stop in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Nick's voice was strained, almost desperate, but there was something else there too, a sense of urgency she couldn't ignore. "I know it's late, and I know this is unexpected," Nick said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "But I need to talk to you. It's about my son." The mention of his son immediately pulled her back to the trauma room, to that frantic moment when Nick had begged her to save his life. The same emotion that had flickered in his eyes then, fear, desperation, was now palpable in his voice. Emily closed her eyes, trying to steady her thoughts. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. She didn't want to get involved again, didn't want to open any doors that had already been closed. But she couldn't ignore the urgency in his tone. She felt a tug of something, sympathy, maybe, or guilt, but she wasn't sure. "It's my son," Nick continued, his voice breaking. "He's in trouble again. I don't know what to do. He's in a bad place, and I think he's going down the wrong path. I don't know who else to turn to." Emily listened, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't the Nick she had once known, the one who had criticized her work, the one who had walked away without a second thought. This was someone different, someone who was broken and lost, someone who had come to her in a moment of desperation. It was clear he was asking for help, but it wasn't help she was sure she could give. "Nick," Emily said, her voice gentle but steady, "I can't do this for you. I can't fix everything that's gone wrong in your life or in your son's. I can't change the past, and I can't save him if he's not ready to help himself." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could hear Nick breathing, his frustration mixing with his helplessness. "I know," he said quietly. "I know that, but I don't know who else to turn to. You're the only one who has ever shown me that kind of care, that kind of compassion. I'm begging you, Emily. Please." His words hung in the air, heavy and full of emotion. Emily's mind raced as she tried to process everything. She had moved on from Nick, from the life they had shared. She had a family now, a husband who loved her, a daughter who needed her. She couldn't allow herself to be pulled back into the chaos of Nick's world. She had her own life to live. And yet there was something about his plea, something about the pain in his voice, that stirred something deep within her. She had always cared for him, even after everything had ended. She had always hoped he would find his way, that he would see the mistakes he had made. But now she wasn't sure if she could be the one to help him anymore. She wasn't sure if she should be. "Nick," she said finally, her voice soft but firm, "I can't fix this. You have to help him. You have to make the choice to change, just like I had to make the choice to change. You can't rely on me for that anymore." There was a moment of silence before Nick spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I get it," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. I just wanted to hear you say it. I wanted to know that you were okay, that you were happy." Emily's heart ached at his words, but she knew this was the only way. She had to let him go, just as she had let go of their past. She had to move forward, for herself, for Daniel, for their daughter. "I'm okay," Emily said softly, the words coming out easier than she had expected. "I'm happy, and I hope you can find that too." The line went quiet for a moment before Nick sighed, a sound of finality in his voice. "Thank you, Emily. I just needed to hear it. Take care of yourself." "You too," Emily said, her voice steady, resolute. As she hung up the phone, she felt an unexpected weight lift from her chest. It was over, truly this time. Nick had found his way back into her life, but only for a brief moment, and now he was leaving again. And she was okay with that. She had learned long ago that the past was a place to visit, not a place to live. With a deep breath, Emily stood up from her desk and looked out the window. The city stretched out before her, the lights twinkling in the distance, and she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had a family who loved her, a career she was passionate about, and a future that was hers to shape. She was finally free of the past. And for the first time in years, she was truly at peace with it all. The weeks that followed Nick's phone call passed in a blur, and yet, for the first time in a long while, Emily felt a quiet sense of contentment that settled deep within her. She had made peace with the past. She had made peace with herself. And most importantly, she had fully embraced the life she had built with Daniel and their daughter, a life that, though imperfect, was full of love, purpose, and promise. Her days were filled with the kind of work she had always dreamed of, the kind of work that made her feel like she was truly making a difference in the world. As one of the leading surgeons at the hospital, she had built a reputation as someone who could be counted on in the most difficult of circumstances, someone whose skills were matched only by her compassion. Her colleagues admired her for her unwavering dedication to her patients, and her patients trusted her, knowing that she would fight for their lives as if they were her own. But it wasn't just her work that brought her joy. At home, Daniel was more than just a husband. He was a partner, a confidant, and a best friend. They had been through so much together, and their bond had only deepened over the years. Watching him care for their daughter, watching the way he lit up when he talked about their future, reminded Emily every day of how lucky she was to have found someone who loved her so completely, so unconditionally. They were a team, and together they made a life that was everything she had ever wanted. There were moments, of course, when the weight of the past would press down on her, when memories of Nick would surface in quiet, unexpected ways. Sometimes it was the way the hospital smelled, or the way the lights flickered in the hallway, reminding her of the nights she spent in that same sterile environment years ago, when she had been so uncertain of who she was or what she wanted. Other times it was the sound of a patient's voice, a voice full of fear and desperation, that would remind her of Nick's plea for help when his son was in danger. But those moments, fleeting as they were, no longer had the power to shake her. She had learned to let them pass, to acknowledge them without letting them define her. On one quiet Saturday morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows of their home, Emily sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading a medical journal. Her daughter, Lily, was still asleep in her room, and Daniel had just left for a meeting at the hospital. The house was peaceful, still, And in those moments of quiet, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. This life, her life, was everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, and it was exactly where she was meant to be. As she turned the pages of the journal, her phone buzzed on the table, startling her from her thoughts. She picked it up, expecting to see a message from Daniel, but instead, it was a number she didn't recognize. Her heart skipped a beat, and she hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said, her voice steady, though her mind raced. "Emily?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was something in the tone that made her pause. "This is Sarah Winters. I'm Nick's ex-wife. I know this is probably the last thing you want to hear from me, but I'm reaching out because I need your help." Emily's grip on the phone tightened, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. It had been years since she had heard from anyone in Nick's life, and hearing from his ex-wife, of all people, felt like a page from a chapter she had already closed. "What's going on?" Emily asked, her voice calm but guarded. "It's about Nick," Sarah continued, her voice shaky. "He's not doing well. I know you've moved on, and I don't want to drag you back into this, but I think he needs help. He's been struggling for a while, and he's not getting better. I don't know who else to turn to. He keeps saying your name. He keeps saying he regrets what happened between you two." Emily listened quietly, her mind racing as Sarah's words sank in. The idea of Nick reaching out again, of him still carrying the weight of their past, was something she hadn't expected. It felt like another unfinished chapter, one she had hoped was over. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I can help him," Emily said, her voice firm. "I've moved on, Sarah. I have a family, a life, and I can't go back to that. I can't fix him, not anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Sarah spoke again, her voice was softer, almost apologetic. "I understand. I thought you might be the one person who could understand. I'm sorry to bother you. I really am. Take care of him, Sarah," Emily said, her voice quiet but resolute. "He has to make the choice to change. He can't keep relying on other people to fix his life. I've learned that the hard way." There was a brief silence before Sarah's voice came through once more, tinged with a sadness that Emily couldn't quite place. "I'll tell him. Thank you, Emily, for everything." As the call ended, Emily set the phone down, her thoughts swirling in the silence that followed. She didn't know what to make of the conversation. Part of her felt sympathy for Nick. He had always been someone she had cared about deeply, and to hear that he was struggling again stirred something within her. But she knew, deep down, that she couldn't be the one to save him. She had learned that lesson long ago. Instead, Emily turned her attention back to her family. Her life was built on the foundation of love, of trust, and of the choices she had made to create a future that was hers, and hers alone. She had come so far, and there was no room for the past to dictate her future. That evening, when Daniel returned home, he found her in the kitchen, a quiet smile on her face as she prepared dinner. He kissed her forehead, and for a moment, they stood there together, their hands intertwined. Lily ran into the room, her laughter filling the air as she tugged at Emily's sleeve, eager to show her the drawing she had made. In that moment, Emily felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The past had shaped her, but it didn't define her. She had built a life that was full of love, purpose, and happiness. And as she looked at her family, her husband, her daughter, she knew that this was all she had ever needed. The future was hers to create, and nothing from her past could take that away. She was finally free.